In 1906, an American company dug a shortcut through a bend in a river. Nobody thought much of it at the time, but that shortcut quietly moved an entire Texas town into Mexico. For the next 60 years, the people living there had no idea they were living in the wrong country. That's not the strangest thing about this border. It's barely in the top 10. The Texas-Mexico border runs over 1,254 miles, and almost none of it is a wall. Almost none of it is even a straight line on a map. It's a river. A single, restless, constantly shifting river that has stolen land, drowned ancient art, decided who was free and who was enslaved, and started arguments that took 100 years to settle. This isn't a line drawn once on one map and left alone forever. It's a boundary that's still, right now, in the middle of being negotiated, fought over, and physically rebuilt. So here are 25 facts about this river and this border. Real events, real disputes, some centuries old, some from this year. Stick with me, because near the end, I'll show you the exact spot where this 1,100-mile border simply stops. Not at a wall, not at a monument. Somewhere much stranger. Let's start with the river that refuses to behave. Number 1, the town that changed countries. In 1906, an American irrigation company cut an unauthorized shortcut through a sharp bend in the Rio Grande. That shortcut sliced off 413 acres of Texas soil, including an entire community called Rio Rico, and stranded it on the Mexican side of the new channel. Nobody fixed the paperwork. Over the following decades, Mexican officials quietly took over the area, residents paid Mexican taxes, and generations grew up believing they were Mexican citizens. Then in 1967, a geography professor going through old survey maps found the truth. Rio Rico had never legally left the United States. Hundreds of people found out overnight they were American citizens by birth. The U.S. finally handed the land to Mexico in 1977, the last piece of American territory the U.S. government has ever given up to a foreign country. Number 2, one river, two names. On the American side, it's the Rio Grande, the big river. Cross to the Mexican side, it's the Rio Bravo del Norte, the fierce river of the north. Spanish explorers named it for the violent floods it produces after the monsoon season. Americans staring at a sun-baked trickle in West Texas in August find fierce hard to take seriously. Both names are accurate. The river just has two personalities, depending on the season and which bank you're standing on. Number 3, a border drawn in water. The 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo set the boundary as the deepest channel of the Rio Grande, wherever that channel happened to be. But rivers don't hold still. The Rio Grande meanders, carves new bends, and sometimes abandons its old path entirely during floods. Every time it shifts, the legal boundary shifts with it. Farms have gone to sleep in Texas and woken up in Mexico. This border was never etched into the ground. It's a line drawn in moving water. Number 4, the flood that stole a city. In 1864, a flood pushed the Rio Grande sharply south, dragging roughly 600 acres of Mexican territory onto the American side, right in the heart of what became El Paso. Mexico never accepted the loss, and diplomatic protests over what became known as the Chamizal Dispute ran for almost a century, passed down from one generation of officials to the next. In 1909, when Presidents Taft and Diaz planned a summit on the disputed ground itself, security uncovered a plot to assassinate both of them at once. The dispute finally ended in 1963 when Kennedy and López Mateos signed a deal handing 437 acres back to Mexico and locking the river into a concrete channel so it could never wander off and start the argument again. Today, the Chamizal National Memorial sits exactly where the fight finally ended. Number 5, land stuck in the wrong country. Every time this river shifts, it can strand small islands of land on the wrong side. These are called Bancos, and the border is dotted with them. Some have been formally handed between countries through short, quiet treaties nobody outside the region ever hears about. Others sit in limbo for decades, technically belonging to one nation but only reachable from the other, with local families sometimes unsure which government's rules actually apply to their own backyard. The Joint Boundary Commission keeps official records of everyone, and after every major flood, a few more get added to the list. The river never stops rearranging the furniture. If you're finding this as hard to believe as I did, hit like right now, drop a comment on which fact has surprised you most so far, and stick around because it gets stranger. Number 6, the second stolen land dispute. Chamizal wasn't a one-time event. A near-identical dispute broke out roughly 100 miles upriver near the towns of Presidio, Texas, and Ojinaga, Mexico. Known as the Ojinaga Cut, it was caused by the exact same problem, a wandering river reassigning land between two nations without anyone's permission. This one took until the Boundary Treaty of 1970 to settle. In the end, the U.S. gave up about 1,600 acres to Mexico, and Mexico handed back roughly 250 acres of its own, a trade designed to straighten out a river that never wanted to be straight in the first place. Number 7, a mission that changed flags. Near El Paso stands the Isleta Mission, built by Spanish colonists in 1682, making it one of the oldest continuously operating parishes in Texas. When it was built, it stood on the southern bank of the Rio Grande, in what was then New Spain. Then the river shifted north, and the mission landed in Texas without ever moving an inch. Later, the Chamizal Dispute put its exact legal location in question all over again. Across 340 years, this one building has effectively existed under different flags, not because armies moved, but because a river simply wouldn't sit still. It still holds services today in a community whose ancestors built it. Number 8, the border underwater. Near Del Rio sits Lake Amistad, a reservoir built jointly by the U.S. and Mexico and filled in 1969. The international boundary runs straight down the middle of it, buried under hundreds of feet of water with no fence or marker anywhere in sight. Before the lake filled, the limestone canyon walls here held some of the oldest rock art in North America, painted by hunter-gatherers roughly 10,000 years ago. When the reservoir rose, a lot of those paintings went underwater for good. The most famous survivor, the White Shaman pictograph, is considered one of the most important prehistoric artworks anywhere in the Americas and is protected today. In drought years, when the lake drops low enough, drowned canyon walls sometimes reappear along the shoreline, showing painted rock that hasn't seen daylight in decades. Number 9, land seized right now. This one isn't ancient history. Since late 2025, the federal government has restarted large-scale border wall construction across South Texas. And because most of the land along the Rio Grande here is privately owned, unlike the mostly federal land in California or Arizona, the government has had to acquire it through eminent domain, family by family, ranch by ranch. In places like Redford and Big Bend, residents whose land has been in the family for generations, in some cases 5, have been told new wall sections may go up just feet from their homes, in a few cases separating families from the river they've fished and farmed their whole lives. In December 2025, officials waived more than 30 environmental and procedural laws to speed up construction. Dozens of land condemnation cases have already been filed in South Texas federal courts. The river that's been quietly redrawing this border for 2 centuries is now the site of one of the biggest land acquisition pushes in modern Texas history. Number 10, the river that disappears. And the river itself may not always be there to build a wall along. In severe drought years, the lower Rio Grande fails to reach the Gulf at all. Cities, farms, and irrigation on both sides pull so much water out that near Boca Chica, the river's final stretch can shrink to a dry sandbar, miles short of open water. Picture walking to the exact spot where an 1,100-mile international boundary is supposed to end and finding nothing but sand. Hold on to that image. We're coming back to it. Quick pause. If this is the kind of deep dive geography content you're into, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making them, and sharing this with one person goes a long way. Number 11. A border drawn on a wrong map. The 1848 treaty relied on a commercial map by cartographer John Disternell, which put El Paso dozens of miles off in one direction and roughly 100 off in another. When survey teams finally reached the ground years later, the real geography didn't match what both governments had signed onto. Fixing the mess took an entirely separate deal, the Gadsden Purchase of 1853. The boundary between what became two of the largest economies on Earth was first sketched from a map that couldn't reliably find a major city. Number 12. The nation that lasted 280 days. In 1840, a group of settlers along the river declared their own country entirely, calling it the Republic of the Rio Grande, breaking away from both Mexico and the Republic of Texas at the same time. Laredo was its capital. It had its own flag, its own government, and its own small army. It lasted roughly 280 days before Mexican forces shut it down for good. The flag survives in a Texas museum today, and the original Capitol building still stands in Laredo's historic downtown, a quiet reminder that this region once tried, briefly, to answer to nobody at all. Number 13. One city, two countries. Laredo was founded as a single Spanish settlement in 1755. When the new border sliced through in 1848, Mexican residents who refused American rule crossed the river and founded Nuevo Laredo directly across from it. The result is two cities with nearly identical names, both descended from the same original settlement, staring at each other for nearly 2 centuries. Combined, they now make up a cross-border community of well over 500,000 people. The border that split one town in half accidentally welded it into an inseparable pair. Number 14, the treaty being rewritten. Now, here's another one happening in real time. Under a 1944 water-sharing treaty, Mexico has to deliver a minimum amount of water north through the Rio Grande Basin every 5 years, while the U.S. sends water south through the Colorado River. By late 2025, Mexico had fallen roughly 800,000 acre-feet behind, its worst shortfall in the treaty's history, driven largely by drought in northern Mexico and rising demand on both sides of the line. The dispute escalated all the way to the White House, with tariff threats against Mexican imports until deliveries picked back up. In February 2026, both governments signed a new technical agreement to manage the shortfall, prioritizing drinking water for cities before farmland gets its share. A nearly 100-year-old treaty, written for a wetter, less crowded era, is being rewritten in real time because of a drought neither government fully saw coming. Number 15, two cities, two clocks. El Paso and Ciudad Juarez share one river, one desert basin, and one metro area of roughly 2.5 million people, and for part of the year they run on 2 different clocks. El Paso observes Mountain Time, Juarez observes Central Time. Because the two countries don't switch for daylight saving on the same schedule, there are stretches where two cities separated by a narrow strip of water sit a full hour apart for no geographic reason at all. People who commute across that river for work track the shifting gap like a second language. That's 15 down, 10 to go, and the strangest ones are still ahead. If you're enjoying this, tap subscribe now so you don't miss the next deep dive into this border. Number 16, the rowboat border crossing. Deep inside Big Bend National Park sits the Boquillas port of entry, maybe the most laid-back official border crossing on the continent. No line of cars, no massive checkpoint building, no rows of flags. You walk down to the river, a Mexican boatman rows you across for a few dollars, then scan your own passport at an unstaffed kiosk and talk, by video, to a customs officer stationed roughly 300 miles away in El Paso. Get approved, and you can eat lunch in the tiny village of Boquillas del Carmen and be rowed back before dinner. It's the only unstaffed legal crossing point anywhere on the entire U.S.-Mexico border. It closed for over a decade after September 11th, nearly wiping out the village's whole economy in the process, and didn't reopen until 2013. Number 17. Bigger than California. The Big Bend sector covers roughly 165,000 square miles, bigger than California. Agents patrol canyon walls up to 1,500 feet high, terrain historically reachable only on horseback. Below the park, an 80-mile stretch called the Lower Canyons has no roads, no bridges, no towns, no emergency services. The only way through is a canoe trip that can take up to 2 weeks, carrying everything you need. It's the most isolated stretch of border in the United States, and most Americans have never heard of it. Number 18, the busiest crossing in the hemisphere. At the other extreme sits Laredo. Its World Trade Bridge is the busiest commercial land crossing in the Western Hemisphere, processing more than 8,000 trucks a day. Combined, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo handle roughly 40% of all U.S.-Mexico trade, worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year. One border. At one end, a rowboat and a kiosk. At the other, a freight corridor bigger than most small countries' entire economies. Number 19, one canyon, two nations. At Santa Elena Canyon, the Rio Grande has carved a gorge with limestone walls rising 1,500 feet straight up, barely 30 feet apart. One wall belongs to Big Bend National Park in Texas. The other belongs to a protected reserve in Mexico. Paddle a canoe through the gap, and for a few minutes, you're inside two national park systems in two countries at once. It's one of the only places on Earth where two nations share a single canyon wall. Number 20. The law that rules the world's rivers. This is the fact I find genuinely hard to believe, and almost nobody outside legal circles has ever heard of it. The principle deciding who owns land when a border river shifts is called the Thalweg Doctrine, the idea that the true boundary follows the deepest navigable channel, not a frozen line on some old survey map. It wasn't drafted in a European capital or handed down by an international court. It was hammered out, case by case, through decades of arguments like Chamizal and the Ojinaga Cut, right here on this one river. The treaties both nations built to manage it became reference documents used to settle river disputes on other continents entirely, including stretches of the Rhine, the Danube, and the Mekong. A body of law now used around the planet was shaped in large part by arguments over a river running through the Texas desert. Number 21, whiskey, casinos, and a new sound. When the U.S. went dry in 1920, Mexican border towns exploded with bars and casinos built for thirsty Americans. Ciudad Juarez alone reportedly ran more than 500 saloons. Rio Rico, still accidentally American, had a casino, a racetrack, and a dance floor rumored to be funded by Al Capone's money. When Prohibition ended in 1933, some border towns collapsed almost overnight. But that same cross-border traffic left something that outlasted the bars. German and Czech immigrants had brought button accordions into Texas decades earlier. Those instruments crossed the river with traders and workers, fused with Mexican ballads, and became norteño music, named for the northern border it came from. A German squeeze box crossed a river and became the sound of a nation. We're in the home stretch. Like, comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next 4 facts are the ones I genuinely call unbelievable. Number 22. Freedom went south, not north. Most people know the Underground Railroad ran north. Fewer know that for enslaved Texans, a separate escape route ran the opposite direction, straight across the Rio Grande into Mexico. Mexico had abolished slavery in 1829, decades before the Emancipation Proclamation. Historians estimate thousands waited for their chance and swam or forded the river into Coahuila and Tamaulipas, where slavery was illegal and Mexican authorities repeatedly refused. American demands to return them. The river that today divides two nations was once, for thousands of people, the path out of bondage. Number 23. The rarest cat. In America, down in the lower Rio Grande Valley, a national wildlife refuge protects the last wild breeding population of ocelots anywhere in the country. Fewer than roughly 100 animals left, clinging to shrinking patches of dense subtropical thorn scrub. That habitat exists only because of this river and the moisture it holds on to in an otherwise dry stretch of land. Ocelots once ranged across the whole of southern Texas before development wiped out their cover almost entirely. The same river, now caught between drought, treaty disputes, and new wall construction, is also the only reason the rarest wildcat in North America hasn't already disappeared from the country for good. Number 24, 1,000 markers, 2 centuries. From Brownsville to El Paso, joint survey teams over the last 175 years have planted more than 1,000 boundary markers, concrete obelisks, and engraved stones, tracing the line two nations have argued over since 1848. Monument number 1 stands at the Gulf Shore. The highest numbers stand out past El Paso in the desert. They've survived floods, droughts, 2 world wars, a Cold War, Prohibition, NAFTA. And now, quietly, some are standing in the path of a wall being built around them. Some are cracked, some lean, some still carry the names of the surveyors who set them nearly 2 centuries ago. Number 25, where the border actually ends. And now, here's what I promised you. Remember that sandbar near Boca Chica, where the river sometimes runs dry before reaching the ocean? That's not just a drought story, that's geographically where this 1,100-mile border actually ends. Not at a monument, not at a wall, not at a checkpoint with flags on either side. After 1,200 miles of canyon, desert, disputed land, drowned rock art, and 2 centuries of argument, the boundary between the United States and Mexico simply runs out of river, dissolves into a quiet stretch of brown water and sand, and disappears into the Gulf without ceremony. So that's 25. A river that stole a town and gave it back 50 years later. A 100-year land dispute that almost got 2 sitting presidents assassinated. A crossing where a man in a rowboat is the entire border infrastructure. A drought right now reshaping a treaty that's nearly a century old. A stretch of wall going up this year on land families have owned for 5 generations. A legal doctrine born here that now settles river disputes on the other side of the planet. And an ending that isn't a wall or a monument, just a river quietly running out of land. If any of these surprised you, let me know which one in the comments. I genuinely read them. Like this video if you want more of this series. Share it with someone who'd argue with you about which fact was the craziest. And subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, because there's a lot more of this border and this planet we haven't gotten to yet. Next time, we're heading into a mountain range most Americans have never heard of, and it's hiding something even stranger than this river. See you there.